Hi, everyone. My name is Jim Pikarski, and I give Dharma talks at our local meditation center called Blue Lotus Meditation Center here in Venice, Florida. These YouTube videos are basically synopses of the talks I've given at the center. Currently, the talks are basically on Zoom, but typically the talks are given from 4 to 5:30 on Sundays. Anyone is welcome to attend. Today I would like to talk about the role of thought in our spiritual practice. I think it's really important to become clear about this because this can create a lot of confusion among people. Certainly thought is a challenging thing because it can be responsible for so many difficulties. Believing negative and distorted thoughts and beliefs is really where delusion comes from. Delusion is the source of our suffering and is ignorance, basically. The source of all psychological suffering is this suffering that is self-created. It's self-created because we're doing it. We're basically believing these negative and distorted thoughts, and we're creating this suffering for ourselves. So this is one understanding. However, one thing happens is that a lot of times when we're meditating, thought starts being seen as the culprit, that we should not be thinking at all. So we can fall into an extreme of fighting thoughts and really trying not to think. And, that's one extreme. The other is that meditation just becomes thinking. So you're just contemplating you're thinking what you normally think, but you just happen to be in a sitting position. So either one of these extremes basically interferes with meditation and stops true meditation from occurring. Thought is truly seductive. It creates a story in our mind, and we get pulled into these stories. And once we're pulled into them, it's like watching a movie or something like that. There's a plot and main characters. Usually the main character is me, and it becomes very compelling. There's a particular type of thought that is the most difficult kind of thought and creates the most problems for us. And this is habitual conditioned thought. It really creates problems for us because it occurs without us wanting it to, and it can recur habitually over and over and over again. And sometimes we can't even realize that it's wrong and it still keeps occurring. So one of the things that meditation does is it trains us to be able to focus on something besides these thoughts. So for example, each time when you're meditating that you find yourself thinking, you notice that, and then you return your attention to your anchor. Your anchor might be your breath, it might be your bodily sensations, or it might be just open awareness. And when you pull yourself back, what you're doing is you've noticed that you're thinking, which is a lot of people never notice they're thinking. They just think all day long. And the other thing is that you've been able to pull yourself away from the fantasy world of thought to the actual world of something that's happening right now, which is your sensations, your breath, or just open awareness in general. So we train ourselves to notice our thinking, and then getting in the habit of attending to our direct experience. And through meditation practice, what happens after a while is that we build this skill, we build this habit pattern of focusing our attention on something that's more real. I think it's really important anytime, and particularly in meditation, is not to struggle with thought. When we struggle with thought, we're just creating more thoughts. We're creating these thoughts that, I shouldn't be thinking so much, or whatever. So thought isn't overcome by struggle. It's overcome by seeing through it, basically. So we see that it's really through wisdom and discrimination. We see that we're thinking, and we move our attention away from it. And the thing is that when we move our attention away from it and shift our attention, This is a very gentle movement. It doesn't take a lot of will. It just, you notice it and you move your attention away. There's very little effort involved. So as we do that over time, what happens is that our thoughts become less powerful. They become less powerful because we're not feeding them with attention. Attention is like watering weeds. You know, the weeds are our thoughts. If you keep watering the weeds, they'll continue to grow. So what we do is we pull our attention away, and then the thoughts become less powerful. They tend to fade. The other thing about thought is that thoughts about life masquerade as life itself. Life itself is our direct experience of life. And a lot of times we have all kinds of thoughts and stories about life. And we're more absorbed in these stories than the actual living of life itself. With these stories comes a character. The main character is the me, and this is the false self. It's made up of thoughts and stories. And once we create this false self, it has kind of a life of its own. So it's a life of its own because we believe it's us. So that us is created in thought. And if we stop thinking for any period of time, we can get anxious. So we're almost compelled to think. We're compelled to think and keep this idea of a false self going. So one of the things about meditation too is getting used to the experience of no thought or lesser thought. So we get more comfortable with it. And the compulsion to think as a defense arises less because we're more comfortable. We're not as anxious if we're not thinking. So of all the types of thoughts, conditioned thought is the most problematic. Conditioned thought is habitual. It's from the past. It repeats over and over and over again, and it's rarely examined. Conditioning is only good for small things. So for instance, if you're walking out the door and your conditioning says, oh, do you have your keys? That can be helpful. But unfortunately, conditioning gets involved with very complex issues. And conditioning is just not able to be helpful in these things. It just tends to obscure things and make them more difficult. It's rigid and preset, and it can't really solve complex problems. So the conditioned thinking is the most problematic of all thinking, the most habitual. Thought is actually a useful tool, and that's important to understand, that thought is just a tool. We're usually focused on thought being so true and false that we overlook its true purpose. It is functional. Is it helpful? So we really need to change our outlook on thought. Thought is not true and false. Thought is either helpful or useful. So true and false really has to do with our direct perception. So you can break down thought into two categories. One is practical thought. A simple thought like, I wonder what we'll need to get at the store for dinner. I will make a list. So this is very functional. It's not problematic. It's necessary. And it's not conditioned thought because you're really in response to the situation at hand. You look in the cupboards and you see that you need sugar or something, or honey, and you put it on the list. There's no problem with this, and there's no suffering involved. So practical thought is when we're using thought, and it's not habitual. It doesn't come from preconceived notions. It's just a response to an immediate situation, an immediate challenge in the environment. Creative thought is another type of thought that is not problematic. Thought is a useful tool in solving complex problems in our lives. So for instance, all of modern technology is developed by thought. So a lot of these things have made our lives much, much easier. So we can find the right solutions for social problems. We can find the right solutions for economic problems. We can use thought creatively to look for new solutions, something that will work, something that is not of the past and is a We only take things from the past that have already been working. So we tend to use creative thought on the spiritual path. On the spiritual path, we look at our teachings, and the teachings are helpful because the teachings are bodies of thought, basically, and these bodies of thought have a particular purpose. They're there to lead us to enlightenment, and so these teachings can be very helpful, but they can also create problems because one of the biggest blunders in spirituality is to cling on to the teachings as true. Because once we believe that they're true, they become dogmatic. So the thing is, they point to truth and they describe truth, but it's up to us to find the truth, to go beyond thought and to experience the truth directly and not get attached to some idea. All of us probably have been around people who are excessively dogmatic, and you can't really talk to these people because their minds have been closed. They're so absorbed in their thought that they can no longer inquire and go deeper in their lives. This attachment to dogma is also one of the basic reasons that there's so much division between religions, because each religion has a different dogma. They may all be pointing at the same truth, but they all have a different dogma, and people think that they're different. Yeah, they are different in terms of their thought structure, but what they point to is the same. So it's almost like if you're going to compare religions, it's better to compare them based upon their functionality. So some are better at leading to enlightenment. Some are better at creating faith for the general public to hold on to for stability. So you have, excuse me, I think I'm going to sneeze. So, what is the purpose of a certain teaching? And, for some people, it will work very well because that's what they're interested in. They're just interested in something that makes them feel better so they can get through life. Other people are interested in going very deeply and finding out the deepest truths of reality. And the teachings that can take us there are a different set of teachings, and we need to be able to use them. But even these teachings are not, quote, true and false. They're just better pointers. So concepts about spirituality are technically not true or false. They either point to describe truth or describe truth, and they do it more or less accurately. All of them need to be checked out in personal experience. If you don't check it out in personal experience, you're just holding a thought. You don't really realize what the thought is referring to. So in a way, you could say that the best teachings help us eliminate falsehoods. Instead of giving us a new structure of thought to believe in, they help us go beyond all thought structures to get in touch with experience directly. Now, some people probably are not ready for that. So, but if you want to go deep, a lot of times you can tell if some spiritual teachings are going to be helpful to you because they help you actually question everything and they help you go deeper, and they're not trying to give you set answers. They're showing you how to inquire more deeply. So thought has limitations. It's just limited in what it is. It's just a tool. And because it's a tool, that's why the best teachings point to direct experience. Because we have to get beyond the thoughts and we have to find out what these thoughts are referring to. So basically, we are wholeness. And, thought breaks up the completeness of our experience into this and that by naming things. This is not a problem and is useful. We need to name things, and we need to have labels for things, and we need to be able to discriminate between things. The problem is that we name our body and our personal experience as self. And when we do that, everything else is not self. So this naming process of thought divides the world. It divides the world between self and other. Then we identify with the part that we name as self, and lose our sense of wholeness because other is separate from us. This creates division, it creates conflict, and it creates defensiveness. If I deem myself as good and then I do something selfish and someone points it out to me, I get defensive because on the side of self is good. And, being selfish is not part of my self-image. It's something I criticize in other people, but not me. So once this ego center is identified with and created and believed, it is really a center around which we defend the territory that's designated by this. So it's almost like this little kingdom that we create inside our own minds. And then we have to defend it against everything that would say something different. So thought needs to be freed. It needs to be flexible. It needs to be we need to not be lost in dualistic frameworks of good and bad. Thought is dualistic. Up and down. There's an inference that there's an opposite to everything. So the thing about our true nature, seeing things directly, is that when we see things directly, we're not lost in the extremes of duality, but we're more balanced. So one of the things that we can do is always question our thinking. Not to question our thinking so much that it just becomes another technique. It's really we'll question our thinking. The question of our thinking has a particular purpose. It points us deeper so that we can have experiences to be able to verify what is true. Once we know what is true through our personal experience, then that understanding of truth transcends any thoughts we may have about it. So if thought is free, then it's free to be a tool of our true nature. In other words, we can practice practical thought and creative thought, and we can use it appropriately. And conditioned thought no longer has a role in our lives. And so rather than thought just being a habit that serves our conditioned mind and our ego, we no longer believe in those thoughts. We question them. And by doing this over a period of time, what happens is that they lose their hold upon us. Because we've been feeding them with belief and energy for so long, they can be quite powerful. So we need to take time to be able to question these things. And if we question them deeply enough, particularly the thought about this separate self, then amazing transformations can happen for us. So I think it's really important to be able to understand thought, because if you're on a spiritual path and you don't really understand thought, it's just too easy to get lost. And so having some understanding of this can be extremely helpful. Thank you.